Well, hello, welcome to I Love Gay today. And we are deep in the world of podcasts lately. And we are here with our first returning podcast guests, Drew Mackie and Glen Lakin from the Gayest Episode Ever. How are you guys?
Hello, we're great. Is that convincing?
We're very good. Thank you for having us back.
Oh, absolutely. No, it's fun because I've enjoyed kind of, especially through Twitter and so forth, it's kind of staying on top of what you guys are up to and some of the guests and so forth that you've had. But you've really come a long way in the last year as far as since we last visited with each other.
Yeah, still being closed up for like the first chunk of it. We got a lot done in the first few months. It was very productive for us.
Yeah. But for those that don't know, that didn't catch the first episode, tell us a little bit about Gayest Episode Ever.
Gayest Episode Ever is a podcast that looks into the LGBTQ focused episodes of classic sitcoms. That's what I say in the opening sentence of every episode, and it's burned into my memory. It's 100 plus episodes, and at this point, we've covered most of the big sitcoms. It's rare that we come across something that did a gay episode that we haven't touched at all yet.
Yeah. And I find what's interesting is that, is at first you're thinking sitcoms, comedy, it's going to be fun. But you guys kind of merged the comedy aspect of what, especially those of us that are a little older, we know that they laughed at us a lot back in some of those early days of sitcoms, and we didn't even think twice about it. It was just natural.
Right.
And but you're able to really dive into that, and then really bring the seriousness to the forefront of what they were actually doing and what they were getting away with back then.
Yeah, I mean, it varies from show to show. Some of them handle those topics a little bit better, but even when they are being sensitive, these are like episode-long stories that don't really have the real estate to spend to do it justice, and so they just touch on the surface level issues and move on, and you hope that they're sensitive to these things, but sometimes they're not, because at the end of the day, they still need that like 3 jokes per page. And they gotta fit it in, and sometimes story takes backseat to your main characters getting to have a quip or a good comeback.
Mm-hmm.
It's like I do love my South Park, but sometimes they get a little rough as well.
Yeah,
We haven't done that one yet. That's a one that would be an undertaking to do just because there are so many South Parks that touch on queer issues that I'm not sure I would even know where to start.
I know. I mean, the upside with South Park is I always said they pick on everybody, but at the end of the day, like their transgender sports one was just a bit over the top, even for me.
Yeah, sometimes, they're not the easiest show to watch.
but that's the thing. Like when a show uses the cover of like, oh well, they just like drag everyone over the coals. But when you're talking about a community that doesn't have the same protections as your cis straight white men, like to say like, well, they treat everyone the same. It's like some people are more vulnerable.
Yeah.
No, that's a good point. But on in that chain of thought, you've really touched on a variety of different things. I saw in your most recent podcasts, you've Fraggle Rock, Simpsons, Family Guy, but you really kind of been diving in deeper into some of the animated comedy series out there.
Yeah, those animated shows are interesting because they're ostensibly for grown-ups, but a lot of times they're watched by children more often than a live-action sitcom would be. And so you have some very impressionable eyes learning about like what boundary-pushing comedy is by watching these shows. And for some people, they might mistake edgy humor as just mean-spirited humor, and it's worth looking into how hard they hit and what they're actually trying to do with their comedy. Like if they're being edgy to prove a really good point, it might be okay. They're not always, especially Family Guy. But yeah,
I saw that you really went in on that one with poor Peter Griffin, but even more importantly, like on The Simpsons, you guys really jumped. You have a lot going on with them.
well, we're both at that age where we were first becoming like socially conscious when it was starting, and like we rode Simpsons mania as children, and then it went into syndication. So we were both just watching Simpsons, like hours of Simpsons a week, just getting imprinted into our memories. So it's a big part of I know my comedic
Yeah,
sensibility comes from there.
it's also our like cultural education for a lot of people in our age group, because that's where a lot of you hear a reference and you're like, I don't know what that joke is, and so you want to learn about it. You want to learn about these shows they're referencing and these like classic movies they're referencing, and so it's a great jumping off point. And so as a show has lasted for so long, it's just interesting to see how media, it's a nice timeline for media's progression also, like, and how these queer issues are handled.
You also jumped into some of my other old time favorites, the Muppets. You and in fact, there was the Fraggle Rock and the Muppets, but you kind of dove into, there was like an AIDS story that you dove into as well.
Yeah, so Matt Baume is a very prolific archaeologist of gay media, is like how I like to refer to him. He has a YouTube channel. He makes a ton of videos, and he does really good deep dives into stuff. And he's been on our show before. We did a Murphy Brown episode with him, but he actually reached out to us and said that he'd been doing work looking into Muppets in general, and Richard Hunt, who was a early Muppet pioneer who happens to be an out gay man. And we talked about him in our Muppets episode, and it came up a little bit just because there's a lot of queer undercurrents to the old Muppet Show. So people should listen to our Muppet Show episode. It's the one where it's about Liberace hosting. There's a lot going on there. It's a very strange piece of TV. But he reached out about this Fraggle Rock that has some interesting parallels to Richard Hunt's actual life, where they filmed the episode shortly after his partner had passed away from AIDS. And then he himself passed away from AIDS a few years later. And the episode is very sad about grief and how we remember people, with one of the takeaways being, after you die, sometimes what you're remembered for is your art. And that is what Richard Hunt ended up being remembered for in the long run. And it was just very beautiful. And it might make you cry if you watch that Fraggle Rock episode now.
Yeah. Well, so you working with Matt Baume. He's famous within our LGBT world, and but you work with others, and you guys have been even working with other podcasters as well. I know I saw something where you were on You're Making It Worse, and but it's really nice, I think, from the outside looking in, to see that kind of collaboration you all are doing.
Yeah, there's a lot of shared interests, obviously, within our community. And so when you find other people who love talking about the same things you love talking about, you want to bring them to the conversation. And so we were on You're Making It Worse, and we had H. Allen Scott on our episode to talk about, what were we talking about?
The Naked Truth with Tay Leone, that not incredibly well remembered 90s sitcom must-see TV era.
They definitely pushed it hard, though.
Mm-hmm.
I'm gonna have to connect you guys when we post this. I'll connect you up with. We interviewed a couple weeks ago these two guys that do Queers and Soaps, and just yet another in that world that I have a feeling you guys might be able to find some good common ground.
See, that would be really helpful, because as people who have not ever watched daytime soaps, myself,
I mean, I watched Passions when I was home from college.
Okay, Passions. Okay, Passions is an exception. I think that's a big queer exception. But we just don't have much of an in there, and those shows are sometimes things that were on for decades. So we really have to bring in a ringer or two to like walk us through how to talk about those without sounding completely stupid. So.
Like, I also kind of grew up with those in the background. One Life to Live. My mother loved that one, and Luke and Laura on General Hospital. That was like the thing.
We actually did talk about Luke and Laura on our All in the Family episode. So on that episode, Archie Bunker disapproves of Mike and Gloria's new friend because he thinks he might be gay because he's a flashy dresser and he's a little mannered in the way he presents himself. And he's actually played by Luke from General Hospital a few years before he started on that show.
Oh, wow. I didn't know that. You know, it's I'll give away the fact that I did start in this business of gay internet when I was 28, but I'm 55 now. It's been going on for a while. Yeah. And so I say that because being 55, I'm constantly referencing All in the Family for something like this. And I'm always amazed that sadly, anybody who seems to be like 40 and under, they just have really no clue about any of those episodes.
It just wasn't syndicated as much for some reason, even though it was a landmark TV show and incredibly popular with a lot of episodes. For whatever reason, like, it didn't get that like noon to 4 o'clock syndication that a lot of like Gilligan's Island got. And so people 40 and under, like, who grew up on reruns of TV just didn't get it.
Well, I mean, the reason being, of course, that it's really hard to put some of those hard-hitting Archie Bunker episodes in like the 4 o'clock time slot right after cartoons end. But Gilligan's Island, that makes sense. That's an easy transition. So maybe you would be syndicating All in the Family later in the day. But, you know, kids wouldn't have been watching. They wouldn't have been getting that thing where you're just watching that cycle of reruns over and over and they get burned into your brain.
It's a cultural disconnect. But no, in addition to the podcast, but Drew, you've launched a new blog. You've jumped into with a story on Shelley Long that I really like.
Thank you. Yeah, so I blogged for like years and years and kind of tapered off. And eventually this year I shut down the blog, but I started a new place where I'd write longer essays that I spend more time on. Grown up essays, not like stuff I tried writing when I was 22, which turns out a lot of those weren't so good. But we did a bonus podcast we just completed called the Shelley Long cast, where we looked at the movies of Shelley Long because we like Shelley Long a lot. We feel like she kind of gets a bum deal as far as how culture remembers her. People seem to think it was a mistake that she left Cheers. And we just wanted to look at some of her movies and try to
give her due, or at least look into the reality of her cinematic works rather than remember how people looked at them at the time.
So we watched all of them, and then after we were done talking about it, I still had so much more to say about the way women are treated in Hollywood and things like that. And the essay ended up meaning a great deal to me that I didn't realize it had in me even when we decided to make the Shelley Long cast.
Well, that one I enjoyed, I think, because I also, like all in the family, I loved my Cheers. And so I was like her voice and the way she said Sam and all that is just embedded and ingrained in my head forever.
Yeah, she's magic.
But moving forward, anything kind of new and exciting in the future after all this?
Cartoons.
Yep.
More cartoons. Children's cartoons, especially. Not like Simpsons and Family Guy necessarily, but we've had a lot of traction with listeners listening to us talk about cartoons. Yeah. So we're starting a new, the sequel to the Shelley Long cast is a cartoon podcast we're calling The Cartoons That Made Us Gay. Okay. And we're going to be discussing cartoons that probably weren't meant to be gay when they aired for kids back in the day, but they sure seem gay to us, and they might have had little pivotal
kernels or seeds planted that bloomed into wonderful gay flowers, especially when you think about the progress that's been made in modern cartoons for children. It's interesting to go back and see shows that definitely weren't allowed to show queer characters, but definitely had a lot of themes that resonated with little gay boys and girls.
Mm-hmm.
Wow, and it's not it's not the same genre of cartoon, but today in the news, Batman and Robin, they said they're casting him as gay or bisexual. I wasn't sure exactly which yet, but
yeah, Tim Drake in the comics is coming out as bisexual, which to a lot of straight fanboys are like, well, you can't do that, but like to anyone who actually read the comics, especially in the early 2000s, of Tim Drake's relationship with Superboy at the time, to fans, they've always read him as bisexual. So this is just sort of making canon what the community has already recognized.
Mm-hmm. Well, that's the hot news of the day, and so well. But no, this is amazing. I love what you guys are doing, and look forward to being able to reconnect again in the future to continue this conversation. And but mostly, I'm just glad you guys were able to take a few moments and share a bit about what you guys been up to.
Thank you so much for having us on again.
Yeah, we really appreciate it. You knew who we were, and you still invited us back. That says a lot. Thank you.
Well, you guys enjoy, and I'll connect with you soon.
All right. Have a good rest of your day.
Bye-bye.
Bye.